Okay, everybody, welcome to The Hard Sell with me, your host, Joel Stevenson. For those joining for the first time, the idea of The Hard Sell is we're covering all aspects of sales. Whether you work as a salesperson or not, usually you touch some aspect of selling in your life. And so we're trying to cover as many topics as we can so that when opportunities involving sales approach you in life, you've got an ability to handle those as best you can. Today, we've got an exciting guest that is going to represent sort of the founder, entrepreneur, CEO side of selling, and that's Matt Blumberg. Matt has founded multiple companies. After selling his last business, Return Path, Matt founded Bolster, which I'm going to have him describe in a moment. And in addition to all that, Matt has somehow found time to write multiple books. His first book was Startup CEO. And the sequel to that book, which just came out recently, is Startup CXO. So, Matt, welcome to The Hard Sell.
Thank you for having me, Joel.
Maybe just say a little bit about, for those that don't know about Bolster, since it's pretty new. Maybe just talk a little bit about that, and then it sort of relates to Startup CXO. So maybe just give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bolster is a company that we started in April of 2020, so just as the pandemic was flaring up. And a group of 8 of us started it. We had all worked together on the management team at Return Path, which was my prior company, for many, many years. And Bolster is a very different kind of company. Return Path was in the email marketing business, and Bolster is in the talent business. And our team was very, very passionate as we scaled Return Path over the years from 0 up to 100 million in revenue. Our team was very passionate about just the art of scaling a business and scaling ourselves as leaders and scaling up our board. And most of us had spent time over the years mentoring and coaching early stage founders and other executives as well. And Bolster is a talent marketplace that is designed to help early stage CEOs and founders kind of reimagine the way they find and use leadership talent. So I think the traditional, sort of the traditional methods of hiring a leadership team or hiring a board are not really compatible with startups and scale-ups in that they tend to be very expensive and very time consuming and very lengthy processes. And early stage companies are nimble and agile, and they need people and expertise in smaller bursts sometimes, and they need to find them more quickly and more cost effectively. So Bolster is a talent marketplace. We have thousands and thousands of C-level executives who have signed up as members, and our clients, who are founders and CEOs, and really any executive, can search the marketplace on their own, or if they want some help from us, we'll give them some help to find executives for either freelance roles, which could be interim or part-time or project-based, or advisory roles, which could be everything from a board of directors seat to an executive coach to a mentor.
Yep. Yeah, that's I think sorely needed in the marketplace these days, and is a clever idea. So we're excited to see how that unfolds. So along those same lines, so the book Startup CXO, I think runs through a bunch of different chapters, sort of by function. So you've got finance, marketing, sales, etc. And so I figured today we would sort of start with the sales part of that. And so I think an evolution that a lot of company founders go through is when you are initially, your very early stages, like you are yourself the salesperson. And so how do you start to think about going from you are the only salesperson to your first sales hire, then to sort of your first sales leadership hire?
Yeah, that's not an easy question. I think let me start actually by kind of talking through the framework that I always use to think about enterprise sales, which doesn't answer your question, but we'll set the stage for it. And this is something, I didn't make this up. This came to me from one of my longtime investors, venture investors and board members, Greg Sands, although I'm not even sure he made it up. He may have gotten it from somewhere else too. But it really resonates with me. And the framework describes sort of 3 stages of enterprise selling. One is called selling on whiteboard, and 2 is selling on PowerPoint, or I think today you would say slides, and 3 is selling on PDF. And it kind of makes sense if you sort of think about the evolution. When you start a company and you're the founder and visionary and you are the sales team, you are selling on whiteboard. You're literally going into a client meeting and waving your hands and writing stuff on the wall and describing what your product does. And your product might or might not actually do that. In fact, your product might or might not even exist. But you're selling on whiteboard. You're describing what's going on. You're the founder. You come away from the meeting, and hopefully the thing that the client wants you to deliver is something close to what you've built. But it's very, very fluid and creative process. Stage 2 is selling on PowerPoint or selling with slides. And the way I always characterize that or think about that is, this is something that you don't have to do as a founder. Other people can be trained to do. But every pitch is still kind of custom. You're still trying to figure out exactly what product market fit looks like, what the different avenues are into different types of clients, what's the thin end of the wedge, circumstance by circumstance. And the reason it's called selling with slides or selling with PowerPoint is every pitch you have to sit down for a couple hours ahead of time and say, okay, who am I going to go see? Oh, this one kind of reminds me of that other one. Let me take some slides from that pitch, and let me take some slides from this pitch, and I'll put them together, and hopefully it all works. But it really requires a fairly senior and clever business development oriented person to pull that off. And then stage 3, which is selling with PDF, is what you get to once you know everything. So once your pitch is really grooved, you know exactly for this type of company in this industry at this size or this geography, here's the pitch they need. I know if I run through this call script with them with this PDF, I'm going to, advance X percent of them from stage 1 of the selling process to stage 2. And you can hand that call script and a PDF and a prospect list to a good and briefly boot camped new sales rep and have a pretty good sense of what they're going to do with it. The thing about the 3 stages isn't just that they exist, it's that they really have to exist in sequence. You have to do whiteboard to get a company off the ground, and you can't go from whiteboard to PDF. You have to go through that PowerPoint phase in the middle to really figure out what the dynamics of the market are.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so it's like until you and where, I guess, at what point then would you would anticipate what the sales leader typically coming in it's somewhere in between stage 2 and stage 3, or after stage 3, or how would you think about that normally?
Yeah, I mean, I think your first sales hire is clearly someone that helps you get from whiteboard to PowerPoint. And, it is, like I said, it's kind of a clever business development oriented person. It's someone who can principally take sales calls off your plate, who can help create that PowerPoint and the first collection of slides that need to be used, but they're still really doing kind of custom selling. I don't think that's a sales leader. I think that's your first sales hire or a couple of hires. And, frequently a good sales leader is not even the person that can do that. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But that's really your first sales hire. I think hiring a sales leader is something different that can come later. And, hiring your first sales leader is about management. It's about building a sales machine. It's about replicating selling capabilities. It's about training. It's about organizing a function. It's about hiring people, professionalizing a department. And it may or may not be about the move from PowerPoint to PDF. You clearly need a CRO to get you from PowerPoint to PDF, but it might just be someone that's organizing, a broader selling department when you're in the selling by PowerPoint phase. but it's not usually the first person you hire.
Right, right. And then I imagine, if you have the sort of the skill and the good fortune to scale a company like you did with Return Path, I suspect that in many cases, even when you do hire that first sales leader that begins to scale, it probably ends up not being the same person that sort of goes the whole length of the journey. Has that been your experience, or maybe talk a little bit about maybe what you've seen in placing some fractional folks and how that maybe how you've seen that happen in the market?
Yeah, I mean, most selling departments most selling departments go through some leader transitions over time. There are sales leaders that can scale from the end of whiteboard all the way through PDF, but there aren't a ton of them, and a lot of them don't once they've run something huge, don't necessarily want to go back to running something small again. They might, but it's I think it's a little tricky to find them. Um, and it is a different skill set. So people can have multiple skill sets, but figuring out how to nose around and find the thin end of the wedge of your product, and be comfortable selling ahead of product, et cetera, is really different than, hey, I'm a sales machine builder, and I know how to map territories and build commission plans for a 500 person organization. Like, just kind of different art.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that, I've seen happen over time is selling has maybe become a little bit more like it used to be in the old days of, ERP and, huge enterprise sales. A lot of times it seemed to me that the sales leader ended up being the person that was actually the one closing the big deals. So it's sort of like the bigger the deal was, the higher it got handed off. And then the sort of the people lower in the hierarchy did less and less of the work. But it seems to me that more modern day sales leaders are much more it's more of an analytical type of function than it is like the rainmaker type of function.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really seen an organization where the sales price is in the seven figures. Like, we had a couple seven-figure deals at Return Path, but most of our clients were in the 5 and 6 figures. And I think when you're talking about price points in the 5 figures and 6 figures, and the sort of mainstream garden variety SaaS companies are going to be like that. The job of sales leader is not really the rainmaker. It's not the big closer. Maybe you help close the deals at the very high end, but I think that's very different than when you're talking about a 7-figure sale or an 8-figure sale. And the people who succeed at running those organizations with 5-figure sales and 6-figure sales are ones that are that are good leaders and managers and really good understanding how to work the pipeline and what the dynamics are of the pipeline. And you can have someone who's maybe a little less analytical and a little more old school in that job if they're paired with a very strong head of sales ops. But the art of the art of making your numbers when what you're really talking about is a numbers game, and working the pipeline is just it's different than, hey, I got to go close a $10 million deal, and I'm getting on a plane to go take people to dinner and do it.
Right, right. Yeah, and I guess following along that same line of thinking, to what extent do you think that the pandemic has sort of changed those approaches that are working or not working, or what are you seeing out there in the market today that might be different than maybe what you would have seen, a decade ago or something?
Well, in terms of selling, or in terms of sort of what you're looking for when you're hiring someone, or
Well, I would say maybe a little of both. Like, well, what are the maybe things have changed about the way that, like, what tactics are effective, or the way that people are successfully going to market and sales, and like as a result, does that change the nature of who is going to make a great sales leader today versus who would have made a great sales leader 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
um, I think obviously things have been different for the last year and a half, and it sort of remains to be seen what they're going to look like, a year from now or a year and a half from now. I think the pandemic has certainly taught all of us that that you can be a lot more efficient and transactional with your time and still produce good results. And the sales meetings that I used to do in person, and by the way, you always book an hour at least when you're doing something in person, because by the time you gear up for the meeting and you're getting there and you're getting back, like no one wants to just book a 30-minute meeting. So you're booking a 60-minute meeting and maybe longer if it's over a meal. And you have to get there and you have to get back. So if you're doing it in your own city, you're talking about a 2-hour loop. And if you're getting on a plane, it's obviously a lot longer. I think a lot of people have figured out that you can actually do that thing in 30 minutes with no travel time. The amount of throughput you can have in selling and the amount of efficiency and productivity has gone way up. I haven't seen any data or research yet about how effective that is, and a lot of prognostications about how things are going to shake out in the future. But I think we now know that that's possible. So the question is, what happens on the other end of this thing? And if I had to guess, I would say that the pandemic has permanently transformed the way small ticket selling is going to work. But that large ticket selling may revert a little bit to the old ways.
Yeah, there was one study I'm aware of. There was a pretty recent one done by McKinsey where they surveyed a bunch of B2B decision makers. And I think I'm probably going to misquote this, but I think the number was something along the lines of, greater than 80% prefer to either self-service or remote selling process. And I think the amount that I think more than half of the participants were willing to do a 7-figure deal without ever meeting in person. I think those are the rough numbers.
That does not surprise me at all. Look, venture capitalists are writing 7- and 8-figure checks without meeting entrepreneurs in person, right?
Right.
So I think that's right. I mean, if you think about it from the buyer's perspective, and you and I are both CEOs, we both buy things all the time. I would much rather burn 30 minutes on a meeting than 60 or 90 with a vendor. And it might even make me more likely to take a meeting with a vendor that I might not otherwise have met with if it's only 30. Quite frankly, sometimes I even do 15s. And I just tell people, I'm really sorry, I got a packed schedule, but I'm happy to talk to you from 8:30 to 8:45. And you can get an awful lot done if you're right to the point.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's definitely it's definitely forced people to be more efficient. We had this came up in the last show that we did, but somebody was sort of asking about if you do get an in-person meeting, then what? And we were talking about this concept of the bar for what you're going to have to deliver as a salesperson for an in-person meeting has probably now gone way up because the perceived commitment is now much, much higher from the buyer side. So, well, maybe switching gears a little bit, we'll talk a little bit about Bolster. And I'm curious about this concept of a fractional sales leader. I think there's probably more that's been, I feel like, done and written about fractional other things like fractional CFOs or fractional marketing. I hear a decent amount. I don't hear as much about fractional selling, but I imagine there are ways to make it work, and you've got some success stories. So maybe just give us a little bit about, like, if somebody was saying, like, hey, I think I need either interim or I maybe need a first sales leadership hire, but I can't really commit to a full-time person. Like what are some ways to think about it, and how could that be structured in such a way to be successful?
Yeah, it is interesting. It's a lot of our clients say, well, God, I would never hire a fractional or interim sales leader. And they say that about technology too. And the reality is we've done a lot of placements of both that have gone incredibly well. So it sounds, it doesn't sound as easy as finance or general counsel or HR or marketing, but in fact, it can work really well. So let me give you a few examples of some fractional heads of sales that we've placed. So one was a company that was just still relatively early stage, and they just couldn't afford a full-time CRO. And they didn't really need one. Like their sales operation, was not terribly complex, but at the same time, like the founder just couldn't handle it anymore because the founder had lots of other things they were doing, and enough sales reps now that were sort of in that junior to mid stage that they just needed some level of deal support. And they got someone that was basically half-time that really got the job done for them for many months, not forever, but for sort of 6 to 9 months. So sort of early stage is one good use case. Another use case that we just supported recently with a client was interesting. It was a company that was principally a B2C company that had just launched a B2B offering. And there wasn't a lot of sales DNA in the company at all. And they really needed a seasoned sales professional just to come in and figure out, like, all right, what do I do with this thing? How do I reach, how do I reach clients, and what's the go-to-market motion going to be? And the CEO didn't know enough about selling to know what he needed. So going with, an interim slash fractional or freelance leader was a really good way of getting their feet wet in selling. And actually, one of the big ahas that came out of it from the sales leader that we placed there, almost out of the gate was, hey, you have a B2B product with two really different audiences. There's a mid-market version and an enterprise version, and there are actually two different go-to-market motions you need, and maybe even two different flavors of the product. And that's something that wasn't obvious to the management team running a B2C company. I don't know. Those are a couple use cases that come to mind.
Yeah, so it is possible to do. Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. This idea that you can get, it's just another form of getting expertise in that. I think people commonly think about board of advisors or something like that. But I think one nice thing about what you guys are doing over there is this idea that somebody could come in and they're going to spend enough time to get into the detail to really figure some things out. Whereas I think a lot of times in, whether it's an investor or an advisor or a board member, and I know you talk a lot about managing boards in some of your books, it's just sometimes hard for them to carve out the time to really get into the detail to help.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, a good advisor will give you a couple hours here or there. And that's really different than leading a team and rolling up your sleeves and doing the work, even if you're only doing it part-time.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, let's we're mindful of your time here. We've got a few folks in the audience, so I'm going to open it up and see if anybody has a question for Matt. And if you do, you can just use the raise hand emoji, or you can also ask it in the chat, and we'll just have a look here and see if there's any questions that are coming up. Otherwise, I guess we'll let you off easy today, and but thanks so much for taking some time out. And if people want to learn more about, oh, actually, there is a question. Sorry, just as I wrapped it up. There's a question. So he's asking, you talked about your first sales hire. Where does sales ops fit into the mix for early stage?
I think sales ops is either done by your head of FP&A or finance or your CFO, or by your head of sales at early stage. Having a mature sales ops function is a real investment, and I think it takes a while before before you're ready to have a full-time person there. But it kind of depends on the company. I could certainly see a scenario where your head of FP&A has a person working on their team that that's in charge of sales ops, or sales ops plus marketing ops plus budgeting or something like that. But I don't know that there's a rule of thumb, but I have to imagine that by the time you've got at least 5 to 10 million in ARR, you probably have a dedicated person working on sales ops, and it's probably not a junior person at the upper end of that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I might also add a little bit about, to the extent that you're running a higher velocity SMB model versus an enterprise model, I think that you tend to need ops people earlier on in the SMB processes because they're so much more data intensive. And
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
if maybe if you don't have all the right, then the leader may be capable of that, but in some cases that's not the skill set. But
yeah.
Okay, great. Well, looks like that's all we've got for questions. So now you're truly off the hook. But we appreciate you coming on. And if folks want to learn more about Bolster, or if they want to pick up Startup CXO, or if they want to be in touch, like what are the best ways to do that?
So bolster.com is the website, and you can sign up as a member if you're an executive. You can sign up as a client if you're in a position to hire, and that could be, you're the head of sales somewhere and you want to hire a sales coach, or a fractional head of sales ops or something like that as well. I think when someone signs up as a client, we give them a copy of the book for free. So that's the easiest way to get one, but you could certainly get them on Amazon as well. It's Startup CEO and Startup CXO. And then Joel, I can't remember if I mentioned this to you, but I'm working on a third book with Brad Feld, who's one of our mutual friends and investors, that is called Startup Boards. That'll be coming out in spring 2022.
Okay, great. Yeah, I will reserve my copy early because that is that I find that topic to be a somewhat challenging one that there is some information written about, but not probably not nearly enough. So that'll be a great one. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on again. It was good to talk to you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Bye.
Bye-bye.